We've already looked at top British sitcoms that have terrible American remakes, but because that list was voted for by a contemporary audience, many of them might have forgotten or never even seen some of the really good classic British sitcoms from the 1970s and the 1980s. So, to make up for that, in this video we're going to have a look at some popular sitcoms from that period that were remade for American audiences. We're going to go through them in chronological order that the original British shows were first broadcast. Nearest and Dearest was a sitcom that ran from 1968 to 1973, starring Hilda Baker and Jimmy Jewell as constantly bickering middle-aged sister and brother Nellie and Eli Pledge. The siblings only tolerate each other because their father has told them they will only inherit his fortune if they stay together for 5 years to run his small pickle business, Pledge's Purer Pickles. Spinster Nellie and her womanising brother Eli rarely agree on anything. They would hurl insults at each other as they fought over the family business or domestic matters, with Nellie's constant nagging and Eli's constant drinking and womanising fueling their arguments. You might think their characters' dislike of each other seems very realistic. The truth is the insults continued off-screen as they disliked each other in real life. Their working relationship was described as the most toxic in the whole of British sitcom history. Nellie had a habit of coming out with malapropisms in a very matter-of-fact way. If Eli is being stubborn about a business decision, Nellie accuses him of being sitting there like a big business typhoon. She even mispronounces the name of her suitor, Vernon Smallpiece, as Vermin Bigpiece. Providing some calm and contrast is the Pledge's second cousin Lily Tattersall, played by Madge Hindle, and her constantly mute husband Walter, played by Edward Mallin. Walter was unable to control his bladder, which led to one of Nellie's catchphrases, "Has he been?" asked in a pseudo-clandestine manner. Another regular character was the pickle factory foreman, Stan Hardman, played by Joe Gladwin. To add some context to the animosity between Baker and Jewell, filming some scenes did have to be interrupted due to Baker forgetting her lines, which Jewell thought was unprofessional. In later episodes, Baker relied on cue cards for her lines. Hilda Baker was diagnosed with dementia during her final years. The apparent forgetfulness might have been the undiagnosed onset of the condition. A study published in 2015 showed that dementia could begin 18 years before the symptoms are recognised. Just as the British series was ending, the American remake was in production for ABC. As well as changing the title to Thicker Than Water, the brother and sister became Ernie and Nellie Payne, and so the company was Payne's Pure Pickles. The other characters kept their original names, and the premise of operating the factory to receive the bequest was the same. The sitcom was broadcast as a summer replacement series. In America, TV viewing is less popular in the summer months, so rather than waste money showing their premium offerings, they fill airtime during the summer with experimental and potentially lower stakes programming. While it featured respected actors like Julie Harris and Richard Long, the adaptation seemingly didn't resonate with American audiences in the same way the original did. The tone and perhaps the central conceit might not have translated well. Critical reception appears to have been mixed to negative. One reviewer noted that nobody is very sympathetic here, and it felt like it might have been too dark a comedy for a wider audience. Based on the very short run and the lack of subsequent seasons, it's clear that Thicker Than Water was not a successful remake. It failed to capture a significant audience or critical acclaim, leading to its cancellation after just 9 episodes. More episodes might have been written or recorded, but there's no information available to confirm this. For the Love of Ada was an ITV sitcom that tells the story of a romance between two pensioners. It starred Irene Handel as a recently widowed Ada and Wilfred Pickles as her love interest, the gravedigger Walter, who buried Ada's husband. Ada's daughter, Ruth Pollitt, played by Barbara Mitchell, and son-in-law Leslie, played by Jack Smethurst, live with her. Ada's relationship with Walter started after meeting him at the cemetery while laying flowers on her husband's grave. Slowly, companionship changes to romance. They get engaged and later marry, after which they move in together at the cemetery lodge where Walter lives. The series was not repeated until 1993 when it was shown on UK TV Gold, then again in 1997. Talking Pictures TV have shown it regularly from 2018 to 2023. The American remake, titled A Touch of Grace to match the change in the character's name, premiered on ABC in January 1973. This version starred Shirley Booth and J. Pat O'Malley as Grace Simpson and Herbert Morrison, who, like their English counterparts, fall in love. This relationship puts a barrier between Grace and her daughter and son-in-law, who are on the stuffy side. It wasn't so much as a failure as simply overcome by being scheduled against the established and highly popular CBS show All in the Family, which in turn was based on the British Till Death Us Do Part series. This resulted in its cancellation in April 1973 after 13 episodes, but ABC continued to run repeats of the show in prime time until June 1973. Love Thy Neighbour was a sitcom that starred Jack Smethurst and Kate Williams as Eddie and Joan Booth, whose new neighbours are Bill and Barbie Reynolds, played by Rudolph Walker, and Nida Baden-Semper, who just happened to be black. In simple terms, Eddie Booth was ignorant and bigoted in contrast with his more tolerant wife. He exhibited a total lack of understanding that the neighbours, Bill in particular, were no different from him, and he constantly referred to Bill with pejorative slurs. Its commissioner at Thames Television, Philip Jones, acknowledged that it received poor reviews. Despite being one of the most popular British television series at the time of its original broadcast, it has never been repeated on UK terrestrial television due to many perceiving it as racist. It was repeated on UK Gold in a late night slot in 1996 and 1997. Knowing the history of race relations in America, one has to ask, what did the American Broadcasting Company think they were doing when they remade Love Thy Neighbour? Even though it was a toned-down adaptation of the British sitcom, the premise of the 1973 American remake was the same as the British show. Conflict between a white couple living next door to a black couple. The humour relied heavily on racial stereotypes and misunderstandings, which was considered offensive by many American viewers and civil rights groups at the time. The National Association for the Advancement of Coloured People was a vocal critic of the show. They argued that the show perpetuated harmful stereotypes of black people and did nothing to improve race relations. They actively campaigned for its cancellation, urging viewers to boycott the programme and put pressure on advertisers. Unsurprisingly, given the controversy and negative reaction, the American Love Thy Neighbour did not perform well in the ratings. Due to the poor ratings and the intense negative reaction, ABC cancelled the show after just 12 episodes. Mind Your Language was a sitcom set in an adult education college in London. It featured people with different social backgrounds, religions and languages being taught English as a second language by Mr. Jeremy Brown. Mind Your Language was unprecedented at the time for its inclusion of so many diverse races on television in the same show. However, all of the students exhibited exaggerated, stereotypical characteristics of their personality. The Sikh and Pakistani Muslim characters were continually throwing insults at each other, and the Chinese student frequently advocated the communist regime of Chairman Mao. Even their clothing matched the simple stereotypes associated with each character. Despite everything, the show was very popular and the original series was broadcast all over the world. The route to the American remake was a bit unusual. In 1981 there was an episode in season 3 of Different Strokes titled Almost American, sometimes referred to as Night School. In the episode, Arnold meets a Czechoslovakian immigrant who is attending night school to become a US citizen, which requires the émigré to pass a citizenship test. The intention was that this would serve as a pilot for a series, but there was no interest from the network. So in 1986, Viacom Enterprises and their partners tried a remake with What a Country. As with the Different Strokes episode, the premise is adapted so that Mr. Brown is teaching a night school course to recent immigrants who want to pass the citizenship test. The series was intended as a showcase for Ukrainian-American comedian Yakov Smirnov, whose catchphrase provided the show's title. There was a similar mix of nationalities as the original show, with the same cultural stereotyping. Among the regular cast was Vijay Amritraj, an ex-professional tennis player who became a sports commentator and actor. It was not generally considered a success. The show only lasted for one season of 26 episodes. The adaptation failed to capture a similar level of popularity to the original. This is partly due to not being shown on major networks, as it relied on syndication to smaller local stations. What a Country later aired in the UK on Sky TV in the late 1980s. Agony starred Maureen Lipman as Jane Lucas, who has a successful career as an agony aunt, but whose own personal life is a shambles. She has a radio phone-in show and writes the Dear Jane advice column for a magazine. Meanwhile, her mother interferes in all aspects of her life, and her husband Lawrence is unreliable and emotionally inept. She becomes pregnant and doesn't know who the father is, her husband or Vincent at the radio station. In the midst of all the turmoil are her next door neighbours Rob and Michael, a gay couple who come to her with problems of their own but also give her emotional support. Agony was the first British sitcom to portray a gay couple as non-camp, witty and intelligent people. This suggests an attempt to move beyond stereotypical comedic portrayals that were prevalent at the time, aiming for a more normalised and relatable depiction of a same-sex relationship. The fact that Rob and Michael also approached Jane with their personal problems indicates a level of character development beyond their sexual orientation, portraying them as individuals with their own complexities and struggles. Writing in The Guardian, television critic Nancy Banks-Smith praised the series, describing it as wide awake, wisecracking comedy with a cracking good comedian in Maureen Lipman, and that the one-liners are 1 a second, fast, fresh and funny. The American remake of Agony starred Lucy Arnaz, the daughter of Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. Confusingly, at least to British audiences, the American remake of Agony was titled The Lucy Arnaz Show, even though the main character is still called Jane Lucas, and in the American show she's a doctor. It was quite common for a show to be named after the star, but usually the main character's first name is the same as the performer, so that does make the choice here a bit more unusual. Dr. Jane Lucas is a psychologist who answers questions on her radio show and in a magazine. She has a messy personal life, but here the similarity to the original show ends. There's no meddling mother or lacklustre husband. It's difficult to discover the reason for any of the changes. We can only speculate on reasons for the absence of the gay neighbours. In 1985, when the Lucy Arnaz show was aired on CBS, gay themes were seldom, if ever, prevalent in popular entertainment, but there were notable representations of gay characters in American TV drama. The network could have been concerned about alienating part of the audience or facing pushback from advertisers. The inclusion of openly gay characters in mainstream sitcoms was more common at that time in the UK. However, it might just have been that the writers chose to focus on different aspects of the original show's premise or develop new supporting characters. They might have planned to introduce them later, but the Lucy Arnaz show only lasted 6 episodes. The short run of the series is most probably due to low ratings, no doubt due to the show airing on Tuesday nights opposite NBC's hit The A-Team. Home to Roost starred John Thaw as Henry Willows and Rhys Dinsdale as his teenage son Matthew. Henry is in his 40s, he's been divorced from his wife for 7 years and is perfectly happy living alone in London. That is until his oldest child Matthew arrives to live with him after being thrown out by his mother. The episodes generally revolve around Henry's annoyance at having his solitude disturbed and the age gap between father and son. Henry employs 2 cleaners during the show's life, originally Enid Thompson, then in the 3rd series Fiona Fennell. Elizabeth Bennet, who played Enid Thompson, the housekeeper, also played Enid Tompkins, the housekeeper in the American remake. Since 1996, the series has been repeated on Channel 4, UK Gold, Carlton Select, Granada Plus, ITV3, Forces TV and That's TV. All 29 episodes have been released on DVD by Network. The American remake was titled You Again, which suggests a more negative reaction to the return of Henry's son. Henry was played by Jack Klugman, whose previous TV sitcom was appropriately The Odd Couple. His son Matt was played by John Stamos. While You Again wasn't a monumental hit, it wasn't necessarily considered a flop. The show performed reasonably well in its first season, finishing at 19 in the ratings, even outperforming longer running shows like 227 and The Facts of Life. However, it was successful enough for NBC to renew it for a second season. Despite good initial ratings, the show ultimately was cancelled. One significant factor cited is that many viewers found it difficult to accept the premise of the show, specifically the age difference between the lead actors. Jack Klugman was 64 and John Stamos was 23. This reportedly hindered the show achieving hit status, especially compared to the British original. Thor and Dinsdale were 43 and 25 respectively, although Dinsdale was playing a 17-year-old. The show also occupied 4 different time slots during its short run. This kind of instability in scheduling can often confuse viewers and negatively impact the show's ability to build a consistent audience. There was also a Dutch version, Hardy Pa, which ran from 1990 to 1993, broadcast by NCRV. The father and son, Norbert and Matthis Hugendick, were played by real-life father and son Luke and Joris Lutz. Keeping it in the family, Luke's brother Peter Lutz was a guest star in 2 episodes. The show ran for 4 seasons from 1990 to 1993 with 55 episodes, more than the original, suggesting the show was popular in the Netherlands. Birds of a Feather was a sitcom starring Pauline Quirk and Linda Robson as sisters Sharon and Tracy, who are brought together when their husbands are sent to prison for armed robbery. Sharon leaves her council flat to move into Tracy's upmarket home in Chigwell, Essex. Their next door neighbour is Dorian, a middle-aged married Jewish woman who is constantly having affairs with younger men. We occasionally see husbands Daryl Stubbs and Chris Theodopoulos, usually in prison. The show was originally broadcast on BBC One from October 1989 to December 1998. It was then revived on ITV from January 2014 to December 2020. While the title of the show and the characters' names changed, the show's premise, as narrated in the opening sequence, was basically the same. So we have reasonably well-off Rochelle Dunphy hosting her sister Lorraine Popowski, whose husbands Roger Dunphy and Artie Popowski were in prison. Adrian Stone was the status-conscious next-door neighbour who resented everything about the sisters' living arrangements. She was secretly having an affair with rough biker friend of Lorraine. Both of the men were serving time in a nearby state penitentiary, so every episode featured them being visited by their wives. This meant we saw much more of the husbands than in the British original, which might have been a benefit to the show. Fox scheduled the show late on Sunday evening in the hope that its broad, somewhat raunchy nature would draw a sizable audience for the time. The network thought the series would be the next big Married with Children. Many critics considered the style of writing for Stand By Your Man was superior to Married with Children. However, overall, the show was panned by television critics and it failed to find an audience. It was quickly cancelled after one brief season. It's not clear if more episodes have been written or filmed. Whilst it featured notable actresses like Melissa Gilbert and a pre-fame Rosie O'Donnell in a lead sitcom role, it failed to resonate with viewers. After Fox officially cancelled the series, it was rerun several times, with the final transmission in August 1992. Despite sticking closely to their British blueprints, most of these remakes failed to capture the magic, with only You Again managing a second outing. Interestingly, the most radical departure, the Lucy on Us show, fizzled out after just 6 episodes. It appears the distinct charm and humour of British sitcoms often gets lost in translation for American audiences. Undeterred, as we've explored before, US networks continue to acquire and adapt UK shows, often with original talent involved, yet replicating their successes remains elusive. While some transatlantic adaptations do find their footing, they are the exception rather than the rule. Thanks for joining me on this dive into the murky waters of American remakes. If you've enjoyed this exploration, please hit like and subscribe for more sitcom insights. Thank you for watching.